Alrighty then. Okay. We're ready to get going for tonight. I don't know if we're going to have much of an attendance. It's Valentine's Day. I hope that all of you are out taking your significant other, wife, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, to dinner and having an enjoyable time. I'm just going to go right ahead and just go over a few little things for you. If anybody pops up with a question, as usual, just jump right in with your question, and I'll be happy to try to answer that question for you as that goes on. Okay, so we did the business models last week. I thought that I really enjoyed, by the way, reading all the different examples of business models that you all came up with, and I thought there were some good ones there. There were some that I would say were more product innovations rather than business model innovations. We're trying to distinguish between what is a product innovation versus what is a business model innovation. So that'd be something you might want to just kind of check over and work through. But by and large, I think most people had a pretty good sense of what was going on there. So tonight we're going to talk about the Lean Launchpad and go a little more deeply into the business model canvas. I've started reading some of your discussions on the Prevost case, which is a nice case, particularly because it was one of our outstanding UMass Lowell graduates who, in fact, has multiple degrees from UMass Lowell, but also has degrees from Harvard and MIT. She was just an incredible Renaissance person who loves to study a variety of different fields and has taken on one of the hardest systems to new ventures to get launched. And yet she's been making that a success. As we've seen, she had to do a pivot in the middle of it. I won't go too much into that because we're discussing this week, unless somebody eventually during the evening pops up with a question about that. I'm going to just kind of go through, pick out a few things here, and then quit for the evening so that you can enjoy the rest of your Valentine's Day evening with your significant other. Okay. So, when we talk about the Lean Launchpad and the business model canvas, let's go back and I like to take this as a spiral approach, meaning that we keep revisiting the Lean Launchpad, going deeper and deeper and deeper into it. We talked about it in the very first chapter. We just keep adding to it as we go on. We spent a fair amount of time on business models this past week. This week, we're going to take the business model canvas, which we introduced last week, and the Lean Launchpad, and really look at it in more detail. So there's a lot of overlap with things that you've read and heard and done before, but going into a little more deeply. So one of the overlaps is to go back and hammer away again on the issue of the of the models of entrepreneurship, because for decades the model of entrepreneurship was to put together a strong business plan which would lay out all of these things that you should be doing and could be doing, and your projections for revenues and how the plan was going to go, and that was kind of the way it was done, and frankly, that's the way it's done in many places today. But the top places have moved away from that. Certainly the top universities have moved away from that. MIT, Stanford, UMass, of course, and locally, Bentley, Babson, pretty much everybody now has moved away from the business plan only approach. But they can't just kind of leave it behind entirely because there's still so many people that really want to do that. So when scholars really began to look at how businesses got started, how new ventures got started, to really study it and understand it. I'm a scientist, as you know, an engineer, so that I base my life upon data. I want to know facts. I want to know truth. I then kind of try to put it together and figure out where to go from there. And that's kind of how I live my life. That is how entrepreneurs really, that scholars that began to study it, wanted to live their life. They looked very carefully. We talked about Sarah Saraswati from the University of Virginia, who went out and interviewed lots of successful entrepreneurs and asked them questions about what did they do, how did they do it, how did they make it work. And she came up with, based upon these interviews, with these principles that you see on the screen in front of you right now. The one that we call the bird in the hand. Who are you? What do you know? Who do you know? What do you have? In other words, an entrepreneur starts with what they know and the resources that they have at hand. They just can't, an entrepreneur that maybe spent their life, working in a restaurant can't go out and say, I'm going to start a pharmaceutical firm. No. You're going to have to start with what you know. And if you get too far outside of what you know, you have a problem. The next thing is that, remember, one of the myths of entrepreneurship was that entrepreneurs are gamblers or extreme risk takers. They are not. Entrepreneurs are not extreme risk takers. Entrepreneurs do take risks. They take calculated risks. So the next principle follows immediately from this study of entrepreneurship, which showed that they take calculated risks. The calculated risks are often characterized by affordable loss. And that the affordable loss is an effort to limit the risk by focusing on what is the worst case, the downside, what could happen here, how much money could you lose. If you're going to mortgage your house and go after this thing, is it affordable to you? And you want to keep yourself within an affordable loss. So that was the second thing that Sarah Saraswati found, was that these entrepreneurs were willing to take risks, but they always wanted to keep it, kind of within the margin of error of an affordable loss. And, not get too far out over their skis. Speaking of getting too far out over their skis and taking a gambler's level of risks, I hope that you're watching the Winter Olympics, because for those of you that hear this tonight or hear it in a future night, I've been enjoying that. Saw some terrible accidents, and so I would say that the skiers in particular take risks that are maybe larger than entrepreneurs take. Sometimes I think they're taking more than an affordable loss, but I suppose they're not gamblers either. They take a calculated risk and have done these things and think that they can do it. So affordable loss is a key principle. The lemonade, this is really what we've talked about with pivoting. You use lemons to make lemonade. We've talked a lot about that. You learn from your mistakes. You don't just say, oh my goodness, somebody gave me lemons. What am I going to do with these? Figure it out. Just like Prevo did. They found out that the market was so crowded with new things coming in diabetes that there really wasn't the possibility for them fitting their way into the marketplace, and decided that they'd go after something that was more needed, frankly, where there was a bigger need. The patchwork quilt. This is, how you make a quilt, right? You take a bunch of cloth and you sew all these disparate pieces together until you make a beautiful quilt out of a bunch of junk. The patchwork quilt in entrepreneurship means the same thing. You know these different things. We talked about the bird in hand. You have friends. You have partners. Can you work it all together, working with your partners to kind of co-create some new marketplaces? The last principle of the effectual entrepreneurship, which we've introduced all these before, as I said, I come back and go over them again and again to make sure that we kind of burn it right into your brain. The last principle of effectual entrepreneurship was that you don't predict the future. Business plans look too much like you predicted the future. You say, in year 3, we will have $500 million in revenues. The pilot in the plane doesn't do that. They fly the plane. They don't predict where they're going to be. They steer the plane to get to where they're going to be. And remember, go back to the lemonade principle, or what we're going to introduce in a second in the Lean Launchpad, which you already know about, the pivot. It's you learn that, okay, I thought that I was going to land at this airport over there, but the fact is that airport is fogged in. I'm going to go land at a safer airport. Great. Go for it. You pilot the plane. You don't predict where the plane is going. Okay, so the Lean Launchpad, which we've been over several times, which is why I'm kind of going quickly here. But again, I want to repeat these things to, in a spiral fashion, getting deeper every time we go through them. The Lean Launchpad is something that was created, as we know, by Steve Blank and several other people. It was developed to a point and adopted by the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program. And that's a big deal because so much research in the United States is supported by the NSF. So many of the new ventures come out of the research that is developed by the NSF. And so putting this into their I-Corps program meant that they were encouraging scientists and engineers to use this methodology of the Lean Launchpad. And we've already pointed out the similarities to the effectual entrepreneurship, the controlling rather than predicting, lemons out of lemonade, and so on. And so Saraswati was a scholar who did careful research on this. Blank is also a scholar, but he's really much more of a marketeer. He really synthesized these things and put it together very, very well. And his really spectacular marketing skills have made a Lean Launchpad kind of the hot topic around the world. So here's Steve. He's a lot of fun if you ever have a chance to go to a talk of his. He is a character. He's very provocative. He likes to fight. And you can tell just from his clothes that he's very provocative and he loves to fight. So he became kind of the leading apostle of business plan rejection when he made that famous quote. In the real world, most business plans don't survive the first few months of customer contact. And even if they did, customers don't ask to see your business plan. So basically he said, forget it. It's about business models and then searching for a viable business model. We're going to go into that in a little more detail. The pieces of this and that vocabulary you want to know about the customer development process. He focuses on the customer. It's a customer development process. In order to do that, you create a minimum viable product. And both minimum and viable are really important. This first product that you develop has to be the easiest one to do that is viable. So you can do a minimum product that's not going to sell, not going to, prove your concept, and you could do a more than viable product that has every bell and whistle. Those are not the things you're going after. You're going to analyze the market, work with the customers, and talk to the customers till you find out what is the product that they will buy, the minimum viable product. And what you're going to do then is you're going to try out these ideas on the customers. And iterate just means you repeat and repeat and repeat. Pivot means you change direction. Iterate and pivot means that you learn something from the customer and you try something new. through a pivot. Get out of the building means that you can't do this sitting in your office. You have to go out and talk to customers. And of course, you've already heard the no business plan survives first contact. So here's what Steve Blank has to say about it, and I'll allow you to kind of read through his words, as I hope you have already done. And one of the things that he uses to kind of make his point is that even Mike Tyson, the famous boxer, once said that when people come into the ring with him, everybody has a plan until they get that first punch in the mouth. Then it's a whole new world. Same thing with entrepreneurship. You're going to go out there, you got a plan, you think you know what you're going to do, you're going to go out there, you get a punch in the mouth, and you say, uh-oh, I better, what would be the word? Pivot. I'd better, try a little different business plan. I love this other quote here. For those of us as old as I am, I used to visit the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. I'd go behind the Iron Curtain when we had an Iron Curtain. It's all gone now. Students, younger students these days, have no concept of what the world was like in the Iron Curtain days. But he makes a great joke about that. He said, nobody has a 5-year plan anymore except the venture capitalists and people from the former Soviet Union. Actually, there's still 5-year plans in China and a variety of other places, but they're pretty much now discredited as being useful at all. A 5-year plan, you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, right? If you're flying the plane, you're going to have to fly around those thunderheads. You may have to pivot. His next point was that in the early days, we thought that a new venture was kind of a small version of a large company, and you should do the same kind of business planning, strategy, and so on and so forth. He said, wrong. It's a whole different thing. Existing companies execute that business model we learned about last month. New ventures are trying to find a business model to execute. So it's a pretty simple idea. A new venture is searching for a business model. An existing venture is executing. So what a new venture really is a temporary organization. Temporary because once you figure it out, it'll become a permanent organization, but it might be different than what you start with. A temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Repeatable meaning that it will work over time. Scalable means that you can scale it up so that you can have a larger enterprise. And so, this is just a slide saying the same thing again. This slide, which you can read, and I hope you have read already because this is really part of the text that I assigned for this week. I always have to come back and say, it's not like Steve Blank discovered that business plans, had shortcomings. Everybody knew that, okay? So he kind of, that's why it's a great marketeer. He kind of made it sound like he was the one who discovered that business plans don't always work. We always knew that. Everybody knew that. The problem isn't that doing a business plan is bad. The problem is if you get it in your head that your business plan is perfect, you're cooked. And so I always told my students, at the last phase of any planning process, you step back, you now turn off your thinking about this plan you put together because you are so wedded to the plan. You think it's such a good plan that it's going to go perfectly, right? And I tell them, okay, now step back and say, what happens when your plan fails and goes wrong? What are you going to do? And frankly, with a lot of the people I've mentored, with a lot of my students, and even people who work for me, when I try to teach them this, sometimes they get very angry at me. I'll give you a particular example of an employee I had that was in charge of running a large meeting that I was putting together for about 5,000 scientists and engineers. This is a big undertaking. And my meetings manager is a very bright, very experienced person. And she put together the plan for the upcoming meeting, which I think that one was in New York City, in fact, at a big hotel there with all the complications of, the exhibits coming in and speakers and the whole 9 yards. But she was so very, very good at what she did. Kind of like Dean Kamen was so very good at what he did that when he built the Segway, he didn't think about, how it could fail. Well, same thing is, I came to her before the meeting, about a week before the meeting, and I said, now Pamela, I said, what is going to happen when none of this works? What will happen? And she was so angry and, told me I didn't trust her, I didn't believe in her, she was a professional, I was not being respectful of all of her professional credentials. I said, no, 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 you don't get it, Pamela. I don't care how good you are, just as I don't care how good any entrepreneur is. Your plans have a possibility of failing. If you're not prepared for failure, you're not going to be successful. She wouldn't hear any of it. She was so mad at me, she didn't speak to me for a couple days. I gave up. I figured, well, she is really good. The plans are really, really good. We went to the meeting. Of course, when the first few things began to go wrong, she actually got so upset when the wheels came off at the meeting that she left the meeting and went back home, flew back home again, and I had to, it went fine. We just, what do? You get lemons, you make lemonade, right? And that's what Sarah Saraswati said. Or, if you learn something, okay, this isn't working, you pivot, you try something else. That's what we did. Everything was fine. Her plan was a good plan. She was a good person. Everything was great. She didn't leave the possibility of learning something new. Okay, so that's the key part. That's what he really has marketed and combined. But he wasn't the one who discovered it. He was just the one that put it together. And, he calls it the evidence-based approach to entrepreneurship. And that's good. I agree with that point. It is based upon evidence, upon research, and that's what we want. He adopted the business model canvas from Alexander Osterwilder and, kind of made that the starting point. So that's how we're going to start. We're going to work with the Lean Launchpad. We're going to start with the business model canvas, but we're going to do some hybrid things with our project that is due at the end of the semester that you turned in the title for this week. So basically, you're still seeing this playing out in entrepreneurship education programs across the country. Just this week, I got a bunch of emails inviting me to have students submit their business plan to the Rice University Business Plan Competition. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Business plan competitions are still being held, even though Steve Blank says, I hate business plan competitions. And I make an analogy to physics, one of my favorite things. And, we still teach Newton's laws, even though Einstein has showed the theory of relativity goes way beyond Newton's laws. But Newton's laws are useful. Students need to know them. And they explain a lot of things in the world that we kind of live in every day. It's just when you get outside that world at high speed or small sizes that you get you begin to fail. So same thing is true in entrepreneurship. We teach the old models, we teach the new models, and we warn everybody, this is about research. Research does not give final answers. It keeps getting better and better and better and better. So there will be models in the future of entrepreneurship that tell us more about these things, tell us better ways to pivot. So don't get into any kind of a dogma. This is not about politics. This is about entrepreneurship. Okay, so he prioritizes customer development versus product development. I work with a lot of engineers, I work with a lot of scientists. I work with a lot of folks that have a new invention. We've talked so much about this. And product development is important. I'm actually writing a case right now in Canarca in which the product failed. So product development is important, but having a great product, as we saw with the rabies monoclonal antibody, is not enough. You need more. And that is the customer development, where he says, getting out of the building, physically or virtually, talk to the customers, ask some questions, and listen. Don't just talk. Since we work with a lot of, I teach a class for UMass Lowell to scientists. I had 40-some scientists, some with PhDs, working at major companies in and around here, from Raytheon to BAE Systems to the Natick Defense Laboratories. I had some people from MITRE and from MIT. So his comment here, sales calls are not your IQ test or your PhD defense. They're always trying to impress me with how smart they are. And they are smart. So I'm impressed. Very good. Now, listen. You're not trying to impress them with how smart you are. You're trying to find out what the customer is willing to buy. So stop talking, listen to the customers. Then get a sales team going at the customer validation step. Once you get through the customer identification, you now validate what you think you've learned about that, and you match that sales team to the market type. And we're going to be talking a little bit about marketing in a future chapter. So let's look at these stages of the process now, as Steve Blank sees it, and as many of our others see it. It begins with customer discovery. That's where you get the founder's vision. You turn it into a series of business model hypotheses. You say, I believe that people will buy this rabies vaccine. Then you have a plan to test customer reaction. So you go out there and you check it, and they say, no, not really. We like our current vaccine, and we only have like one patient every 2 years anyway. So why do we need your new thing? He has discovered something, and you have to change. On the other hand, you might go to India and talk to the customers there and discover that rabies is endemic. They don't have enough ways to treat it. Oh, you have discovered a customer. Customer validation is the next step in which you try to see, okay, I think this is going to work. Let's try it. Let's validate it and see if it can be repeated again and again. Customer creation is the beginning of execution. This is where you begin to develop a sales channel. Remember, in the early stages of customer discovery, you're not trying to sell them too much. You're trying to discover what they need and what they want and what needs you can meet. But in customer creation, you now think you have something that is going to be really great for them, and you're beginning to sell. And then customer building is when you begin executing that validated business model. At that point, off you go, okay? So he likes to show agile development, which is a term that was used, by others before, Steve came along. But in agile development, it's build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. Around and around you go, and you compare that to the way, which, by the way, for when I have students that come out of the military, which I've had a lot. I've mentioned the ones out of the Natick Laboratory and all. They do waterfall development over here, right? They do a lot of kind of preparation of requirements. They say, this is our requirements. And they get detailed papers and everything. And then you move to the design phase. You begin to design something to meet those requirements. And then you move to the implementation phase. Okay, you start to build this thing. Then you move to the verification with alpha and beta testing. And finally, you might get the customer ship. But anybody that has been in that knows that sometimes it's hilarious when you discover the requirements aren't the right requirements, but you've gone through the design phase, you're into the implementation phase, your contractors are trying to do something that is dumb. They can tell you it's dumb, but you can't change it because the requirements were done according to the U.S. government requirements. That's how you get, $500 toilet seats. Okay. This is little thing showing how you have a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you test it, you get a aha, an insight, and then you go around with a new hypothesis and you go round and round that loop, iterating until you get it right. And of course, we already said that the key part of that is that minimum viable product where you get the highest return on investment versus risk. It's not a minimal product, but it's more of a strategy and so on. And you have an iterative process because you generate an idea, you then try to, take that product to customers, you learn, you prototype, you present, you collect data, and around you go. Um, so, um, as we've seen, you'll often learn something that will cause you to pivot. As we've said, it's not a sign of failure, it's a sign that you're very smart. Pivoting. I tell that terrible story on my meetings manager, Pamela, but she saw having to pivot as a sign of failure. Had she been through a course like this, she would have seen the need for pivot as being the next thing to move towards success. Okay. All right. So, our goal is to teach them it's not about invention, it's about the business model, and that by doing all these things, you can accelerate the time to get you there. So that brings us back to that business model canvas that you're going to be preparing for your product, and which you'll probably end up having to do at some point in life and in other ways. We have, I'm going to go through each of these sections. You can see that you start on the left with the key partners, and you then, move to key activities. Then you look to see what are your resources you have down here. Then you go over and actually, you know what? This is where you start. This is usually number one. You start with the value proposition. What is it that you have that someone cares about? Because before you could do those other things, you're going to have to do that. We've seen how important he has said customer relationships are. Those customer relationships and who your customers and identifying them. And right below that, you see is channels. That's how do you get to those customers. Over to the right is customer segments. Okay, what kind of customers are we going to pick? Are they 18 to 25 or are they 50 to 70? What segments are you going after? The two bottom things are kind of traditional business things. You're going to have a cost structure. You're going to hire people. You're going to need stuff. So you're going to need it. There's going to be a cost structure. You better know what that is. If you have a cost structure, then you better have revenues. Where are you going to get the money to support that cost structure? So that is the business model canvas. On the next slide, I just lay this out again. Remember, I said that the value proposition was number one. That is, you need to know what value that your company brings to the customers. Then figuring out what segments you're going after, how you're going to reach them, how do you retain them and get that development, what do you need to do to make it work, where are you going to get your resources and what are those resources, who can you find a partner. If you can find a partner, that's something you don't have to do. We partnered with Intel at iLink. You saw that. They even invested in us. They, the good news is that they invested in us, gave us money, and got us lots of customers. The bad news is they built all of our code into stuff that they did, which now is in everything in the world, without us getting any further royalties on it. But partners can do a lot for you. How does the company generate its revenues? Huge. That's what you see in a lot of these, like Twitter has been through this, right? I mean, Twitter has become very popular very, very quickly. But everybody sat around saying, where are they going to get any money to support all this? And of course, what you're supporting is the cost structure of that business. I will let you work through a variety of these example business models. Be happy to at any point answer questions either by email or we don't have a good attendance tonight, to say the least. So, but feel free to launch questions about how you fill out the various pieces of this. LinkedIn has a great business model canvas worth having a look at. Google has another business model canvas, well worth looking at. And by the way, these are always changing, right? So this Google business model canvas was the Google business model canvas of about 2 years ago. And if you did a business model canvas today, it's going to be different. I can't keep these up to date. It's just like the Uber business model. I was trying to show how Uber got into the market, so we used the original business model, and then I tried to indicate how the business models changed over time, which Uber hasn't changed very much. And then, of course, we come to the case of Prevo, in which they launched a project. They won the MIT 100K business plan competition. It's probably the most prestigious business plan competition in the country, and they won it. They won it, and then they abandoned the idea of chewing gum to deliver insulin. So it shows you how important learning from the customer is. It was, it was incredibly well done. We showed their examples of their business model, the early business model. This was prepared directly by Manisha Nazari-Goldberg, the founder and the UMass Lowell triple graduate, along with Harvard and MIT. And it's kind of fun to compare this to the later business model canvas after they had gotten out of the office. Remember, they came up with they went out to interview lots of people, physicians, scientists, attorneys, pharmaceutical companies. They actually went to different countries who offered them money. Ireland offered them money to go there. Singapore offered them money to go there. They wrote a lot of grants, and they learned that their plan probably wasn't going to work. That when you're walking down a hallway and you open a door looking for the exit and you find a closet, you close the door and go to the next door. That is what she did. She closed the door on diabetes and jumped forward into something that they had thought about from the beginning, because they thought they could do a lot of different things, but they really hadn't developed and wasn't the thing that they won the business plan, which was oral cancer chemotherapy. And you can begin to see that they began, because of those interviews, they were able to add a lot to focusing their customer segments and what their target market was. They added to their partners a lot. Their value proposition was completely new because they were going after a different target. The activities were somewhat similar, but they got much more detail on the activities of those things. So, in fact, Prevo did a very strong pivot. It's still a work in progress. It's, as I've said many, many times, one of the most difficult things to do is to bring a drug to market. And whether they'll be successful or not, I don't know. I have enormous respect for Manisha Goldberg as being able to pull it off. But as I've said, no matter how good you are, in the end, you may have to take a new direction. You may learn that it's just not going to work the way you thought it was going to work. I don't know. She seems to be having a lot of success with this business model canvas. I think she probably will make it work. Okay, so now you've learned a little bit about the various models. You can see that the first model, the causal model, a traditional model, was very goal-oriented. You set a goal. I want to sell $3 million worth of chewing gum to cure insulin. Okay, or in iLink, we wanted to sell $3 million worth of software to Fortune 500 companies. Yeah, we're very goal-oriented. Now, the fact that, well, eventually we did, but we didn't do it at the time we expected that we were going to. So we could have been very depressed, or we could pivot. So effectual entrepreneurship is much less goal-oriented and more interested in how you use resources at hand to create something of value. And the Lean Launchpad de-emphasizes detailed planning in favor of speed, flexibility and responsiveness, learning, and pivoting. Okay? So it says if you spend too much time doing detailed planning, you're not going to be moving fast enough to be able to make it work in the market. Alrighty then. That's pretty much what I wanted to go over for tonight. I don't know if Ralph, you might want to say anything or ask anything. Be happy to take that, or I can just say best wishes to everybody who is seeing this tonight or on a future evening, which I know that many of you are seeing this later this week. But I'm broadcasting on Valentine's Day, and I, wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. And hi, Ralph, I see you there.
You too. Hello. Oh, can you see me? Is it working? I was just
Everything's
trying.
working. Yeah, I
Okay.
see you fine.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, I was following as closely as I could, and I had some trouble connecting earlier, and I arrived late, but I managed to get most of it, so
Good.
it's good.
Well,
I
you.
don't have any questions,
Mhm.
but if I come across something that I have concerns about, I'll email you using the Blackboard.
You said you
Can
have
you?
something you're concerned about on the use of the blackboard?
No, no, I'm sorry. This is not what I said.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, you were going in and out a minute ago, but I can hear you pretty well right now.
All right, good. I was saying that I don't have any questions for now, but if
Okay,
anything
good.
comes up, I'll email you using the Blackboard.
Oh, great. Yeah, now I understand that perfectly. Good. It was great to see you again tonight, and I'll look forward to seeing you on email, and wish you all the best.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.